Imagine waking up one morning and never seeing your family again. No warning, no goodbye. One moment you are living your life, the next, you are being forced hundreds of miles from home, marched in chains towards a coastline you've never seen. Ahead lies the ship, behind lies everything you've ever known. For more than 3 centuries, millions of Africans were swept into the system so vast that it connected 3 continents and generated unimaginable wealth. Yet behind the profits and empires stood a human tragedy that reshaped the world forever. This wasn't just a trade, it was one of the largest forced migration in human history, and its legacy can still be felt today. This is the untold horror of the Atlantic slave trade. By the late 1400s, European explorers were crossing oceans in search of new trade routes, wealth, and territory. As European colonies expanded across America, vast plantations emerged producing sugar, tobacco, cotton, and other valuable goods. The demand for labor was enormous. Plantation owners wanted workers who could survive harsh conditions and generate profits. Over time, a massive trading network developed between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Ships carried manufactured goods from Europe to Africa. Human beings were transported across the Atlantic. Raw materials and plantation products returned to Europe to become known as triangular trade. At its center stood millions of enslaved Africans. What began as a commerce would become one of history's darkest chapters. The Atlantic Ocean became a floating prison. People were packed into ships and transported across thousands of miles of open air. The journey could last weeks or even months, depending on weather and condition. Disease spread rapidly. Storms battered vessels. Food and fresh water were often limited. Many captives arrived weakened by the ordeal. For sailors and merchants, this voyage was business. For those trapped abroad, every sunrise brought uncertainty. Every day became a struggle to survive. Historians estimate that millions had drawn that middle passage over the century. Countless others never reached their destination. The Atlantic Ocean itself became a silent witness to one of the human greatest tragedies. Yet even in this condition, people resisted. Some preserved songs, others held on to memories of home. Many refused to surrender their humanity. Upon arrival in America, survivors entered a world they had never imagined. They were sold into slavery and forced to work on plantations, farms, mines, and in households. Life was defined by labor. Days were long, conditions were often harsh, freedom was denied. Yet despite every attempt to erase their identity, enslaved Africans carried their culture with them. Language survived, music survived, stories survived, religious traditions survived. Generations passed these traditions down, shaping the culture of entire nation. The influence of Africans would become woven into the history of Americans forever. The history of slavery is not only a story of suffering, it is also a story of resistance. Across the Americas, enslaved people fought to preserve their dignity and freedom. Some escaped, others organized revolts. Many resisted through culture, faith, education, and community. Acts of courage appeared in countless forms. Each represented a refusal to accept oppression as destiny. Their resilience inspired future generations and laid foundations for later movements seeking justice and equality. Even under unimaginable circumstances, hope endured. By the 18th and 19th century, opposition to the slave trade began to grow. Writers, activists, religious leaders, and formerly enslaved individuals spoke out against the system. Public opinion slowly shifted. Government introduced laws restricting and eventually banning the Atlantic slave trade. But ending the trade did not immediately erase slavery itself. The struggle for freedom continued for decades. The consequences of centuries of slaves would remain long after the ships stopped crossing the Atlantic. The Atlantic slave trade changed the course of history. It reshaped continents, built fortunes, destroyed families, and yet wounds that will echo across the generation. Yet, amid the tragedy stands another story. A story of survival, a story of resilience, a story of people who endured unimaginable hardship and whose descendants continue to shape the world today. To understand the modern world, we must understand this history. Because history is not just about the past, it lives in the present, and the lesson it teaches can help shape a better future.